Welcome, my dear guests, to the captivating expanses of my story. Chapter 18, 2216. Lena Schulz stared out of the EK Susquehanna's viewport, her eyes fixed on the swirling atmosphere of Skaufoe Ural. For months, the crew had been in a holding pattern, waiting for permission to establish an outpost in the system. The prolonged inactivity had taken its toll, the mood was irritable, and morale was low. Lena had done her best to keep the crew busy, but even she felt the strain of enforced idleness. The ship's communication system rang as if sensing her thoughts. Lena's heart raced as she opened the message, and her eyes quickly scanned the contents. A smile spread across her face as she read the words she had been waiting for so long. They had been given the green light to set up the outpost. "Attention, all crew members," Lena's voice rang out over the ship's intercom. "We have just received authorization to begin constructing the outpost in the Skaufoe system. Prepare to begin work immediately." A collective cry of joy echoed through the corridors of the ship. The news invigorated the crew, who were already on the verge of cabin fever. As the ship hummed with renewed energy and purpose, Lena allowed herself a moment of relief. The wait had been unbearable, but now they could finally get on with their mission. The next day, as the crew began preparations for the outpost construction, Lena called a meeting in the ship's conference room. One of her technicians, Alexei Volkov, had asked for time to present the results of his research project. When the participants had taken their seats, Alexei stood at the front of the room, his eyes excitedly shining. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Over the past few weeks, I have been observing Skaufoe Ural in detail, focusing mainly on its mysterious energy shield." Lena leaned forward, fascinated. They were all fascinated by the planet's mysterious barrier, but until now, it had eluded their attempts to analyze it. "I've discovered something remarkable," Volkov continued. "The shield is not constant. Every few weeks, it opens a small window that allows passage through its defenses. This window stays open for about 30 minutes before it closes again." The assembled team murmured in astonishment. Lena's mind raced at the implications of this discovery. "During these brief openings," Alexei explained, "I managed to deploy several exploratory probes. The data they returned is... well, it's breathtaking." With a gesture, Alexei activated the holographic display in the room. The air flickered, and suddenly, the conference room was filled with vivid images of the surface of Skaufoe Ural. The crew gasped collectively. Before them stretched a panoramic view of a vast moorland landscape shrouded in a constant haze. Rolling hills in deep shades of green and purple stretched as far as the eye could see, punctuated by crystalline formations that caught and refracted the light of the system's distant star. The Ural Mountains loomed in the background, their peaks shrouded in clouds and mist. The mountains seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, their slopes covered in vegetation like they had never seen before. "This is just a small slice of what lies beneath the shield," Alexei said in a voice full of awe. "The flora and fauna we have seen is unique. We're dealing with an ecosystem that has developed in complete isolation for who knows how long." Lena stood up and gazed with her eyes at the haunting beauty of the alien landscape. "Alexei, this is extraordinary work," she said, her voice full of pride and excitement. "Your discovery could be the key to unlocking the secrets of Skaufoe Ural." Andrea Sauer stood on the bridge of the EK Ptolemy, her eyes fixed on the main screen. The Shu Wu system spread out before them, a carpet of stars and cosmic dust. The red dwarf star pulsated gently in the center, surrounded by its 5 planets and the asteroid belt. But amid this cosmic splendor lurked something unexpected that alarmed Andrea's scientific instincts. "Commander, we have a problem," Dr. Elias Stern reported, his voice a mixture of awe and concern. His fingers tapped frantically over the sensor console as he analyzed the incoming data. Andrea tensed. Her shoulders stiffened beneath her uniform. "What do we have, Doctor?" "A ship," Stern replied, his eyes widening behind his goggles. "And not an ordinary one. The energy signatures are beyond anything we've seen before." The alarm howled a shrill whistle that sent the bridge into a frenzy of activity. Officers rushed to their stations, fingers flying over control panels. Lieutenant Tanaka called out status reports while Lieutenant Garcia booted up the defense systems. "Show me," Andrea ordered, her voice calm but with an undertone of tension. The image on the main screen changed, zooming in on a point in space between the 2 habitable planets. Andrea's breath caught as the contours of the alien object became visible. Hovering before them was a colossal spaceship that dwarfed anything she had ever seen. It was a behemoth, a floating fortress in space. Its sleek, black hull gleamed in the light of the red dwarf star, covered in alien characters that pulsed like glowing scars on its surface. Turrets protruded from the hull like the spines of a gigantic cosmic predator. Their muzzles glowed a menacing red, ready to unleash devastating energy. Hangar bays gaped like hungry mouths, large enough to devour entire fleets. Above it all, a shimmering energy field bathed the ship in an unreal glow. It flickered and pulsed to the rhythm of alien technology beyond human comprehension. "Size?" asked Andrea, her voice barely more than a whisper. Her fingers clutched the armrests of her command chair as if she could maintain control of the situation. Marcus Chen, the sensor officer, swallowed hard. His eyes flitted over the displays on his console, searching desperately for an error in the data. "At least 10 times the size of the Ptolemy, Commander. Maybe more. The sensors can barely detect the end of the structure." "Life signs?" Andrea asked. Her voice sounded calm, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her inner turmoil. Chen shook his head. Sweat glistened on his forehead. "No life signs, but enormous energy signatures. The scans show nothing but emptiness in the corridors of this ship. It's as if ghosts are controlling it." Andrea frowned. A ghost ship? It was impossible with this technology. Her scientific curiosity battled her sense of responsibility as commander. Whatever this ship was, it posed a potential threat to her mission and crew. "Establish a link," she instructed Tanya Rodriguez at the communications console. Rodriguez confirmed and began scanning all the channels. Time seemed to stand still while they waited for a response. But the radio remained silent. Only the crackling of the cosmic background radiation reached their ears. Andrea followed the enigmatic Colossus's movements as it confidently moved through space. Its maneuvers showed a grace and precision at odds with its menacing appearance. The origin of this vessel remained a mystery, but its technical superiority over the Ptolemy was obvious. Andrea felt a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. "Prepare an emergency jump out of the system. Regardless of the nature of this ship, we cannot assume peaceful intentions," Andrea ordered. The Ptolemy was already activating its propulsion systems for a hasty departure. News of the automated dreadnought in the Shu Wu-Gu system spread like wildfire through the corridors of the Imperial Senate. Paulina Romero, leader of the One Throne supporter faction, stormed into the Senate chamber with a fiery glare. "We need to know more about this ship." Her voice echoed through the room, amplified by the acoustic architecture of the Senate chamber. "Its military capabilities could change everything. Imagine the power we could hold in our hands." Senator Viktor Volkov nodded in agreement, his eyes sparkling with strategic calculation. "A behemoth like that could turn our entire defense strategy upside down. We must act before our enemies get wind of it." The other factions reacted differently, reflecting Kostya's complex political landscape. Nadine Heimer of the Conclave of Exalted Clarices was visibly trembling, her hands clutching the edges of her podium. "This is a sign. The gods are warning us against our hubris. We must not ignore their warning, or we will be doomed." Myra Gupta of the Citizens Elite Union tried to remain rational, her voice an anchor of reason in the churning sea of emotions. "We shouldn't rush to judgment. Perhaps this discovery also holds opportunities for us. Let's consider the scientific and economic progress we could make from it." But her words were drowned out by the growing tumult, swallowed up by the cacophony of excitement. Senators jumped up from their seats, gesticulating wildly and outdoing each other with speculation and cries of warning. The chamber resembled a beehive, with each faction trying to push through its agenda. Xavier Heimer watched the chaos with a stony expression, her piercing blue eyes scrutinizing each senator individually. She raised her hand, a simple gesture that nevertheless radiated authority, and calm gradually returned. The heated tempers cooled under her penetrating gaze. "We will approach this situation cautiously," she explained, calm but firm. "Admiral Romero, prepare a detailed report. We need to know what we're dealing with. Get all the data from the Ptolemy. Every detail could be of crucial importance." Paulina bowed curtly, her posture taut and militarily precise. "As you command, Imperatrix. I will personally see to it that no aspect is overlooked." When the news reached the streets of Xanadu, a wave of uncertainty spread through the population like an electric current, Citizens gathered in squares and bars, heatedly discussing the significance of this discovery. Many's eyes reflected a mixture of fear and fascination as they tried to comprehend the possible consequences. Almar Kazan reported live from the marketplace, "The mood here is tense. Many are wondering what this huge ship means for our future." 3 students from the Imperial University were sitting in a cafe on the edge of the square. "If it's as advanced as they say, what does that mean for us?" one asked quietly. His fellow student shook her head. "I suddenly feel so small. Insignificant." The third stared into his cup. "All our knowledge, our achievements, maybe we're not as special as we thought." Similar conversations took place all over the city. The Kost people's feeling of insignificance crept into their hearts. On May 14, 2216, the EK Ptolemy entered the Rejuhan system. Commander Andrea Sauer stood upright on the bridge, her steel-gray eyes fixed steadfastly on the main screen. The starlight danced in flickering patterns across the ship's surface as it freed itself from the clutches of hyperspace. "Sensors online and calibrated," Lieutenant Tanaka reported calmly. "Initiating comprehensive scan of the system." Andrea nodded curtly, her slender fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the excellent metal surface of the back of her chair. The seconds crawled by, stretching into a seemingly endless eternity. Suddenly, a shrill warning signal broke the tense silence on the bridge. Tanaka's console lit up in alarming red. "Commander," she shouted with suppressed excitement, "I'm detecting multiple unknown signatures in the system." Andrea's spine stiffened instantly, and her muscles tensed. "Detailed classification of the signatures, Lieutenant." "Now?" Tanaka hammered at her controls with nimble fingers, her eyes darting over the incoming data streams. "The patterns don't match any known configuration, ma'am," she reported with growing concern. "The signals appear to be from advanced exploratory probes. Whoever placed them has probably long since moved on. But the energy signatures. They indicate advanced alien technology that far surpasses ours." "Alert headquarters," Andrea ordered, the code name for the unknown species, Aleph threat. While the crew carried out their tasks with precise efficiency, Andrea turned to Dr. Elias Stern. Behind his frameless goggles, his gray eyes sparkled with excitement. "Doctor, present me with your findings on this system." Stern leaned over his console, his fingers flying over the holographic keyboard. "Fascinating, Commander. I've christened the 4th planet, Atlas, which is in the Goldilocks zone. A cold superterrestrial world that could challenge our understanding of habitability." Andrea nodded appreciatively. "Excellent work, Doctor." Helmsman set a course for Rejuhan Atlas. Her voice took on a more demanding tone. "But I want maximum alert. The Aleph threat may already be watching us. Stay alert." Andrea's eyes widened in awe as the EK Ptolemy approached the planet. Rejuhan Atlas hovered before them, a massive sphere of blue and white shrouded in swirling bands of cloud. "Bring us into a stable orbit," Andrea instructed the helmsman. Dr. Stern read out the scans. Most of the surface is covered in permafrost. But there is a narrow strip at the equator with more moderate temperatures. Andrea stepped closer to the viewport. An alien landscape stretched out below them. Vast tundras of silvery grass waved in the wind, crisscrossed by rivers that shimmered like veins of liquid sapphire. Rugged mountains towered in the distance, their peaks crowned with eternal ice. "It's beautiful," whispered Marcus Chen, the crew's biologist. "And dangerous," added Tanya Rodriguez, the head of security. "The gravity is more than twice as strong as on Kost." Andrea watched as 3 moons passed over the horizon, casting ghostly shadows across the landscape. The planet's beauty was breathtaking, but she couldn't forget they might not be alone. "Prepare a probe for descent," she ordered. "We need to find out more about this planet. And stay on the lookout for signs of the Aleph threat. We don't know what awaits us out here." The EK Ptolemy hovered in orbit around Rejuhan Atlas while the crew observed the fascinating and potentially dangerous world below them. Commander Andrea Sauer knew they had to proceed with caution. The discovery of the Aleph threat had complicated the situation, but the beauty and potential of Rejuhan Atlas were too tempting to ignore. With bated breath, the crew waited for the data from the probe that would shed light on the secrets of this alien world. Paulina Romero sat tensely in the Imperial Senate while Myra Gupta spoke about the latest economic forecasts for the Kazakh sector. Suddenly, Paulina's communicator vibrated. She glanced discreetly at the display and froze. The covert operation had been successful. With trembling hands, she opened the encrypted message from quantum dynamics. The remains of Emma Hart and debris from the EK Asimov had been recovered. At that moment, they were being offloaded at a secret facility on the outskirts of Xanadu. Paulina fought the lump in her throat. Emma had been more than just a colleague, a friend, a visionary, a hero of the realm. Her loss had left a gap that no one could fill. Memories of joint research projects and long nights of passionate discussions about the future of Kasach flooded Paulina's mind. She rose abruptly, her uniform rustling softly. "Imperatrix, forgive the interruption. I urgently need to speak to you in private." Her voice trembled almost imperceptibly. Scifiaudiobook frowned, her piercing blue eyes scrutinizing Paulina. After a moment, she nodded. "The Senate is adjourned for a short break." Her clear voice echoed through the hall. Paulina reported on the secret rescue mission calmly in a shielded adjoining room, the walls decorated with mysterious symbols. Her hands involuntarily clenched into fists as she spoke. Scifia's eyes widened as she heard the news. Tears shimmered in the corners of her eyes, a rare sight of vulnerability in the usually so composed Imperatrix. "Emma. After all this time." The Imperatrix whispered. Her fingers clutched the armrests of her chair. She breathed deeply, the smell of old wood and incense filling her lungs. Her voice became firmer, carried by the strength of her position. "Admiral Romero, you have done great things. The Empire is in your debt." Paulina bowed, her uniform crackling softly. The shadow of a bittersweet smile flitted across her face. "It was my duty, Imperatrix. Emma and her crew deserve to come home." Her words echoed in the silent room. Scifiaudiobook nodded resolutely. Her blue eyes sparkled with determination. "We will pay our last respects. An act of state for our fallen heroes. And a monument that will memorialize their sacrifice for all time." She rose, her magnificent gown swishing across the marble floor. They returned to the Senate chamber, their footsteps echoing through the vaulted corridors. The assembled dignitaries fell abruptly silent as they entered. A sea of expectant faces turned towards them as they saw Scifia's serious expression. The air in the hall seemed to vibrate with tension. "Honorable Senators," the Imperatrix began. "We have just received news of the utmost importance. The remains of Research Minister Emma Hart and parts of the EK Asimov have been recovered." A murmur went through the hall. Nadine Heimer slapped her hand over her mouth. Rita Griffin stared at the floor in disbelief. "Emma Hart and her crew gave their lives in the service of our empire," Scifiaudiobook continued. "Their courage and sacrifice will not be forgotten. I am ordering an act of state in their honor. A monument will also be erected to commemorate these heroes for future generations." Myra Gupta stood up. "Imperatrix, the Senate supports your proposal unreservedly. Let us discuss a worthy design for the monument together." Paulina watched as the Senate engaged in busy discussions. Plans were made and ideas exchanged, but her thoughts were with Emma and the crew of the Asimov. They had finally returned home. Almar Kazan stood before the camera, his face more serious than ever. The studio lights seemed dimmed as if to reflect the mood. He took a deep breath and began his special broadcast. "Distinguished citizens of the Empire of Kasach, we gather in mourning and reverence today. The brave crew of the EK Asimov, led by the brilliant Emma Hart, find their final resting place today." The camera panned to images of the magnificent ceremony. Thousands of people lined the streets of Xanadu, many with their heads bowed and tears in their eyes. In an unprecedented act of unity, the Empire and the Helix Church have joined together to pay the highest honors to our fallen heroes, Almar continued. His voice quivered slightly as he described the details of the ceremony. The Helix Cathedral rose majestically into the sky of Xanadu. It is an architectural masterpiece that embodies the principles of genetic purity in every line. Its spiraling structure wound upwards, a double helix of shimmering quartz crystal and polished steel. The sunlight refracted through the facets, casting a kaleidoscope of colors onto the square before it. In front of the entrance stood two colossal statues representing the founders of the Helix Church. Their faces were grave and full of determination, their eyes fixed on a distant future. At their feet, eternal flames burned in bowls of blue glass, a symbol of the inextinguishable power of pure genes. The forecourt was paved with mosaics of rare minerals depicting complex DNA sequences. Worshippers often knelt here to meditate before entering the cathedral. Fountains rippled gently, their water supposedly endowed with purifying properties. A respectful silence reigned inside the cathedral. High vaulted ceilings were lost in the twilight, broken only by rays of light shining through artistically designed windows. These showed scenes from the history of the Helix Church, from the first days of genetic research to the founding of the Kazakh Empire. Along the walls were niches with holographic displays documenting the progress of genetic research. Visitors could interactively navigate through the church's findings, accompanied by the gentle voices of virtual teachers. In the center of the nave was the altar of purity, a massive structure made of transparent crystal. Inside, it pulsed a DNA helix that seemed to be made of light. It rotated slowly and mesmerizingly, a focal point for prayer and meditation. Behind the altar, a staircase led down into the crypt, where the vials containing the gene seeds of the deceased were kept. The walls here were covered with inscriptions immortalizing the names and merits of the purest among the pure. The area surrounding the cathedral was equally impressive. Manicured gardens of genetically optimized plants surrounded the building, a living example of the power of controlled evolution. Narrow paths meandered between exotic flowers and crystal-clear ponds where fish swam with glowing scales. Beyond the gardens rose the towers of the Gene Institute, where the leading scientists of the Helix Church conducted their research. The buildings were futuristic and clinical, a stark contrast to the cathedral's organic architecture. Almar Kazan's voice broke the audience from contemplating the awe-inspiring scene. In this sacred place, he continued, the remains of our fallen heroes will find their final resting place. But their legacy, their genes, will be preserved and honored here, a promise of a future in which their sacrifice will not be forgotten. As is a tradition in the Church of Genetic Purity, the gene seed of each crew member has been secured, Almar explained. These precious vials are stored in the sacred gene archive, ready to one day give new life. The camera zoomed in on two imposing figures, Imperatrix Savia Heimer and Princess Nadine. Both wore black, their faces masks of dignity and sorrow. Her Imperial Majesty Savia Heimer and Her Highness Princess Nadine personally pay their last respects to the fallen, commented Almar. Their presence underlines the immense significance of this loss for our empire. The ceremony progressed, a perfect choreography of imperial pomp and religious solemnity. Almar described every detail, his voice an anchor for the millions of viewers who shared his grief on their screens. The EK Asimov may be destroyed, but its legacy lives on, Almar said as the images showed the vials lined up in the Gen archive. The future lies dormant in these tiny vessels, a future that Emma Hart and her crew gave their lives for. Rita Griffin stared through the observation window of the Ek Ibn Battuta at the chaotic debris field surrounding the first planet of the 34 Ceti system. Her eyes searched intently for anomalies among the thousands of fragments glinting in the sunlight. Suddenly, she spotted something unusual. I've located something, Rita murmured to herself, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the ship's systems. Her slender fingers flew over the controls. It appears to be some capsule embedded in the debris. Fascinating. With practiced precision, she adjusted the sensors and zoomed in closer, her green eyes sparkling with curiosity behind her trademark horn-rimmed glasses. The capsule is hermetically sealed, perfectly preserved amid chaos, she noted. Our scans can't penetrate inside, but it's sending out a signal, a countdown. Most unusual. Rita turned to her crew, her bushy red hair swaying with the movement. Her voice took on a serious tone. Since it could be a bomb, we should leave it where it is. Safety first, even if my scientific curiosity protests. Despite her caution, Rita could not ignore the sensor data. Incredible, she whispered in awe as she examined the precise countdown. Her fingers drummed excitedly on the console. The accuracy of this clock surpasses anything we've seen before. It's nothing short of revolutionary. Holding her breath, Rita activated the display. Her eyes widened in surprise as the data flickered across the screen. It can't be, she murmured in disbelief, trembling slightly. The implications are overwhelming. Dr. Lian Chen, her chief science officer, stepped beside her with deliberate steps. His distinctive glasses gleamed in the dim light of the lab. What have you discovered, Commander? He asked in his characteristically calm voice, which nevertheless betrayed a hint of curiosity. Rita looked up, her green eyes sparkling with excitement and confusion. The clock is set to a certain date, but it's 42 years in the future. It's exact, Chen. Every millisecond seems to matter. There was an awkward silence in the room as the significance of this information sank in. The quiet humming of the devices suddenly seemed deafeningly loud. The precision of this chronometer is truly remarkable, Rita finally marveled, her eyes wide. Her fingers drummed nervously on the console. But why would anyone dare to adjust the time to a date in 42 years? What ominous fate might await us then? She shook her head in disbelief, her bushy red hair swirling. Or is it a warning? A promise? Chen, the possibilities are endless, and each one makes me shudder. Dr. Chen rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Maybe it's some warning or a prophecy. Or simply an ingenious riddle that someone has left us. Rita examined the clock further but found no clues about its purpose or origin. She sighed deeply. Honestly, Dr. Chen, I don't know what we're supposed to do with it. We have no idea what this countdown means or who created it. After a brief hesitation, she continued, at the moment, we can do nothing more than document the discovery. Without further information, it would be too risky to manipulate the watch or take it with us. You're probably right, Commander, Dr. Chen agreed. We'll reseal the capsule and leave it where we found it, Rita decided. Perhaps we'll find more clues to its significance in the future. Prepare a detailed report for the Imperial Senate. On the command bridge of the EK Equinox, an atmosphere of tense anticipation prevailed as the probes received exploration data from the distant planet Luan Yundi 2. The adept science team had discovered fascinating evidence of a once thriving civilization whose glory had long since faded, including dozens of crashed starships of unparalleled design. Commander Mariana Martin stood before the massive main display, her eyes fixed on the incoming data. Her heart beat faster as the images of the alien wrecks unfolded before her. She sensed that they were on the verge of a groundbreaking discovery. Look at these crack patterns in the hull, explained archaeologist Dr. Erica Bergman, pointing to a particularly striking wreck. One half is completely intact, while the other has crumbled to powder. With a smooth movement of her hand, she activated a hologram that showed a strange piece of wreckage in three-dimensional splendor. Mariana stepped closer to the floating image, furrowing her brow thoughtfully. It seems as if a powerful force has torn the spaceships to pieces, she mused as her fingers gently glided through the projection. Dr. Bergman nodded in agreement. That's exactly what I think, Commander. The destruction patterns are highly unusual. It almost looks as if the material itself has disintegrated. Lieutenant Hank Schwan, the senior sensor officer, spoke up. Commander, I've just completed the spectral analysis of the debris. The results are, well, amazing. She projected a series of complex diagrams following the hologram of the wreckage. Mariana turned to the new data, her eyes widening in surprise. This alloy. I've never seen anything like it. The molecular structure seems to be somehow change. That's right, Schwan confirmed. It's as if the material oscillates between different states. Solid, liquid, even gaseous, all at the same time. Dr. Bergman stepped closer to the display, her eyes sparkling with excitement. That could explain why parts of the ships are completely intact while others have disintegrated. Maybe it was some protective measure that went wrong? Mariana rubbed her chin thoughtfully. Or a weapon of unimaginable power. Something that could attack the molecular structure of the ships themselves. A shiver ran down her spine as she considered the possible implications. Whatever had destroyed this ancient civilization was obviously far beyond her own technological comprehension. Mariana suppressed a sigh of frustration. As fascinating as the discovery was, her options for further exploration were limited. She turned to Dr. Bergman and Lieutenant Schwan. Unfortunately, we can't do any more at this stage. The system must be fully explored and secured before we can conduct a detailed investigation on site. Dr. Bergman nodded reluctantly. Her eyes were glued to the holograms of the wreckage. Understood, Commander. But what a discovery. This technology could revolutionize our understanding of materials science. Lieutenant Schwan cleared his throat. I suggest we use the remaining time for comprehensive surface scans. Maybe we can discover more anomalies. Mariana agreed. Good suggestion, Lieutenant. Use all available sensors. I want to capture every detail we can from orbit. The crew set to work with renewed vigor. Sensors were recalibrated, and scan patterns optimized. The EK equinox circled in a precise orbit around Luan Yundi 2 while its sensitive instruments recorded every piece of recognizable information. Hours passed. Mariana watched the incoming data with growing excitement. Suddenly, Dr. Bergman spoke up excitedly. "Commander, take a look at this. The distribution of the wrecks follows a pattern." Mariana stepped closer to the main display. Indeed, the debris fields formed concentric circles around a central point on the planet's surface. "What could that mean, Doctor?" Dr. Bergman gestured animatedly. "It looks like some kind of wave emanated from this center. Perhaps the source of the force that destroyed the ships?" Lieutenant Schwann spoke up, his voice strained. "Commander, I'm picking up faint energy signatures from this central area. They are pulsing in a regular rhythm." The hairs on the back of Mariana's neck stood up. "Is the source still active?" "It's hard to say," replied Schwann. "The signals are fragile. It could be the remains of an ancient energy system, or something completely different." Mariana could feel the tension building on the bridge. They all knew that they were on the threshold of a monumental discovery, yet their hands were tied. "Dr. Bergman, prepare a detailed report on our findings," Mariana ordered. "Lieutenant Schwann, I want to complete mapping these energy signatures. We need to provide the Imperial Senate with all available information so they will recognize the urgency of a full expedition." Mariana's gaze wandered to the mysterious wrecks on the main screen as the crew busily carried out their tasks. What secrets might be waiting for them down there? What forces had wiped out a highly developed civilization? She clenched her fists resolutely. The EK equinox might not be able to solve this mystery, but they would do everything in their power to pave the way for future discoveries. Hey, I would be happy if you could give my video a like, leave a comment and subscribe to my channel to stay up to date.